Wabash College in 1981,
Wow.
where he served as student body president.
Surprise.
He then went on to receive his law degree with honors from Indiana University School of Law in 1986. Steve served as an adjunct professor of law at Indiana University Bloomington for several years, then went on to work as a federal trial attorney in both Indianapolis and Santa Ana, California. He joined the staff of Tippecanoe Memory Gardens here in West Lafayette in 2012 as a family service counselor and now holds the position of director of the facilities. Locally, he's active in the Greater Lafayette Chamber of Commerce, Kiwanis and Kiwanis Foundation, of course, First Baptist Church of Lafayette, and serves as managing director of Community Hot Lunch of Lafayette. With no further introduction needed, here is Steve Riggs.
Thank you. Because I am a member of Kiwanis and you all know me, I'm going to just touch on a couple things, and I am available for questions afterwards or for further discussion in the days and weeks that follow. But I've been asked on and off over the course of several years. People have looked at me and said, "What do you do? Do you sell burial property? We see you, and we're not sure exactly what it is that you do." So I'm going to try to give a little context and let you know what it is that I do. What I do is help families reflect, gather information about, and then plan cemetery. Yes, Ted.
Are these the people at the funeral home asking you that question?
No, these are people here in Kiwanis and in the community. Thanks for clarifying that.
Yes.
So what I've done is I put together just a brief presentation of what it is that I do. So cemetery and funeral, no one wakes up in the morning and says, "Today's the day that I want to plan my burial. Today's the day that I want to plan my funeral." But being an ostrich, putting your head in the sand, or a turtle where you just shut the world out, doesn't work when it comes to one of the most important days, not in your life, but in the life of all the loved ones who surround you. So to just give you a brief overview as to why this is important, Americans are living longer than ever before and far longer into retirement. And because of the cost of health care, there's quite often not enough funds or time and attention to focus on a meaningful exit and a meaningful end-of-life decision. And I come into contact with one or two people every year in talking to families privately that just refuse to do this because they're going to go up in the rapture and they don't need my services. And so far, at least as I'm speaking to you here today, the mortality rate has remained constant at 100%. So I just want to show you very briefly. If you look at the table, see where it says men in 1900, the average life expectancy was 47 years of age. If you were born in 1900, your average life expectancy would have been 47 years of age. If you're born in 2000, your average life expectancy for a man would have been 75 years. That is a 60% increase in a 100-year time period. That is a phenomenal increase in life expectancy. It's the same for women. For some reason, women live about 2 years to 26 months. This is on average, longer than men. A woman born in 1900 would have lived to have been 49. In the year 2000, she's going to live to be nearly 80 years of age. Well, why is that important? It's important because you're going to live much longer on your retirement assets. You're going to live much longer in our society when you are not working. For example, today, a man who reached the age of 65 today can expect to live on average until 84.3. Now, go back to this, even in 1950, which I've got in red. See where it says that if you were born in 1950, your average life expectancy would have been 67 years of age? So if you had retired at 62, 64, 65, you would only have 1 to 4 years in retirement. Nowadays, if you retire at 65, you're going to have 19 years on average in retirement. And if you look at the bottom sentence, those are just averages. 1 out of every 4 65-year-olds today is going to live to be 90 or longer, and 1 out of 10 will live past 95. So not only are we living much longer, but the cost of our health care, our medical expenses, is rising exponentially. This is from the research department at the National Institute of Health. You can see that the distribution of health care costs is strongly age-dependent. outside of the first year, you really don't have, and again, this is on average, but people don't have substantial medical expenses until they hit the age of 50. Now, obviously, if there's a disease or a car accident or some catastrophic illness, those are exceptions to the rule. But in the broad stream of things, a lot of the healthcare is preventative healthcare. It's making a doctor's appointment ahead of time. But once you hit the age of 50, then the annual cost for people who are elderly, this is under the NIH guidelines, starts to rise 4 to 5 times more than those of people in their early teens. And then you can see that the oldest group consumes 3 times as much health care as those 65 to 74, and then it keeps going up and up and up. And people will then say, well, I understand all that, but that doesn't really apply to me. I'm healthy. What the University of Michigan has found out, and looking at a number of 2 full years, 2011 and 2012, from the U.S. Center for Medicare and Medicaid, which covered all Americans, every single American who was age 66 to 99 that died, it doesn't matter what, if you've had a catastrophic illness your whole life, if you've had a progressive illness that has started to accelerate in terms of time and medical attention as you've reached 60 or 70, or if you have been healthy your entire life just in the last 12 months of your life. If you look at the last line, for people who are over 65 that have died, your health care costs in the last year of life rise 50 to 700%. Overall, and this is a statistical fact, every single person in this room, as a whole, we're going to incur 85% of the total medical expenses in our entire life in the last 18 months of your life. So what does that mean for planning? Well, it means that you're going to need to think through that I'm living longer, and my healthcare expenses at the end of life are going to be extraordinary. So is this something, is making plans something that I want to avoid, or is it something I need to address? Well, if you don't address it, then your loved ones will have to address it. In a 20-year study by the American Psychiatric Association in the United States, they rated the stress inventory of life events. What are the most stressful events in our lives in America, and this included Canada? Number 1 is the death of a spouse, far and away. So if you've not made plans ahead of time, at the moment that your spouse passes away, you're going to be confronted with a host of decisions, 67 to 75 decisions, at a time that you are in the highest stress point in your life. And you can see there are others. The death of a close family member, a brother or sister, a parent, a child is in the top 5. Then gaining a new family member, if one spouse dies, then you may have to move in with your children or a family member. The death of a close friend is also in the top. And I actually always highlight and enjoy the fact that in-law troubles is made the list. And if anyone has experienced troubles with their in-laws, then you can recognize that the death of a close family member or your spouse is far above how stressful that is. The fact is that if you're grieving the death of a spouse or a close family member, it is the worst possible time to make major life decisions. And you can go all across the board in a number of different disciplines to verify that this is the case. In the Harvard Medical School summary of the study of the end of life and healthcare costs, they found conclusively that grief will cloud your thought process. If you make abrupt decisions without proper reflection, you will likely regret them later. And you can very easily step back and think to yourself, has there ever been something that you did and then later on you wished you hadn't have done it? Or the flip side, let's say that there was something that you didn't do, and later on, Al's shaking his head, and later on you wish that you had. Well, when you're doing a burial or doing a funeral, there are no do-overs. You only have one chance to make it meaningful, to be respectful, and to get it right. The Mental Health America says that the loss of a loved one is life's most stressful event and can cause a major emotional crisis. It's not the time for immediate permanent decisions. And this is, world psychiatry is throughout all of the developed countries in the world. That the onset of grief brought on by the death of a loved one and the initial grief-related numbness, that feeling where you can't really focus or remember what's going on, can be disabling. Well, what happens then is that if you wait until the last minute to make the cemetery and funeral arrangements, you are putting yourselves and your loved ones in a very difficult position, because the chances are that you have outlived your financial resources. Let me flip back for just a second to the very start. When you see here, more than 40% of Americans, this is from the United States Department of Health and Human Services, 40% of Americans outlive their financial resources within the last year of their life. I'm going to get to Medicaid in just a second. That is projected to be 50%. Half of Americans are projected to outlive their financial assets between 2022 and 2025. They're not sure exactly when it will happen, but we're in the last 5 weeks of 2018. So in the next 3 to 6 years, virtually half of Americans are going to be in a position where they don't have sufficient financial assets at the time of their passing. So what is it that I do? I work with families, I work with accountants, I work with lawyers, I work with trust officers, but mostly I listen, and I'm an information resource. I sit down and talk to families one by one, family by family, to find out what it is that they want to do so that we can achieve that now. The advantages of doing this are that in that way, the loved one's decisions are known and they're finalized in a written record. The decisions are made together. Spouses can talk together. They can talk to their brothers and sisters, their parents, or their children. They're not alone. There's been so many times where I've had a widow walk in, and they have put off and put off and put off wanting to make arrangements, and now the husband's not there. When you make arrangements ahead of time, it transforms my position from one of business to one of service. I'm not going to be pulling out contracts. I'm not going to be talking about payment arrangements. I'm not going to have to go through the administrative, logistical, financial, legal paperwork that is required nowadays in our society to have a burial and a funeral. It's all done. It means that I can then respect the dignity of the family. They don't have to immediately come into our office 2 to 5 hours after a death. It could be a day or two, and the only decisions that we're going to be making are the time of the service, and then perhaps who's going to be the clergy, who's going to be the musicians, what kind of flowers. Everything else can be prearranged. And not only, and the importance of that is that once the arrangements are paid, then the price is frozen forever. That is guaranteed by law. And when you do it ahead of time, you can get discounts and put it on payment plans so that you can make the best possible selections, the most informed selections at the most favorable terms. If you think of it in terms of a planning pie, on the right is cemetery burial. And those are the 4 aspects of planning that are necessary for a cemetery. You've got your burial property, if you're going to want it, a vault, memorialization, that's going to be a headstone or lettering on a mausoleum, and then the legal burial fee, the open and close. That's the right side, so once it's paid forever. The mortuary or funeral home is the left side. It doesn't matter where you are in the United States. You can prearrange for your funeral services, you can pick out a casket or urn, and then there are limited cash advances, the cost of flowers or a death certificate that you can't project until the time of passing. What that means is it's going to cost about $300 to $500 when someone passes away, but what you can avoid is having it cost thousands and thousands of dollars, especially since in your family you don't know whether or not you have perhaps had a loved one who's had a long, extended, debilitating illness. My father had Alzheimer's and had Alzheimer's for 8 years. That's actually how I got in touch with the cemetery in the first place. I was trying to figure out what to do for my father at a time when he could knowingly participate, and I then learned that there's a lot of advantages to doing this ahead of time. I want to address 2 specific points, because people have told me, I don't want to make the decisions now because my life may change in the future. On the cemetery side, I may either what my dad used to call retire and go south, or what he called chase grandchildren, where a lot of people will then move to go where their children and grandchildren live. In the United States, typically member gardens where I work, and all public cemeteries that have been administered after 1946-47, are members of the International Cemetery, Cremation, and Funeral Association. So if you were going to move more than 75 miles away, and you ended up making that your new home, your burial property could transfer. Again, these are consumer protection laws that encourage families to make these decisions ahead of time. If you live within 75 miles of your home, the law presumes that you haven't really left your hometown. So it'd be the difference of if I moved, or a couple moved from here to Lebanon or to Noblesville to be near their grandchildren, that's within 75 miles, we would still then own their property. But if they moved to Louisville, Cincinnati, or Jacksonville, Florida, they could transfer their property. So again, there's an incentive to make the decision ahead of time rather than on the very moment of loss. And then for funeral, there are consumer protection laws that have been put in place by the Federal Trade Commission. And here's a great example. You can make funeral arrangements with us here or with the funeral home of your choice. And let's say that you are either at dinner in Chicago or on holiday in Florida and you pass away. Now, let's think through what could possibly happen. If you don't have arrangements made ahead of time, then you literally have to go to the phone book or your cell phone and call a funeral provider in Chicago or in Florida that you have no contact with, no present or future connection with. It's just that you have an immediate need for their services. Well, you're treating them like an emergency room. And when you go to the emergency room, can you get all the medical care that you need? Of course you can. Do you end up paying the highest possible price? Yes, you do. If you've previously made arrangements and you have an issue and you pass away at dinner in Chicago or on a holiday in Florida, you call your home funeral home or you call our office. We have a prepaid trust agreement. It doesn't go into the account of the funeral home. It's protected by law. It goes into a trust account with your name on it. We then simply find the zip code where your family member has passed away, and we transfer the prepaid funeral plan down to Florida or up to Chicago, which means, again, that you get the benefit of the price protection, and you don't have to be charged emergency room prices. So there are consumer protection laws in place. You can see that the last sentence says, a prepaid funeral trust may be transferred nationwide with full protection of the value of the arrangements. It's the gift that keeps giving to your family, especially if you travel some or have a second home. I'm going to come back now to Medicaid, healthcare at the end of life. Because 40% of Americans are outliving their assets, what I do twice a week is meet with families who are trying to qualify for continuing medical care. I want to make a distinction. It's in the middle of the slide. Medicare is a federal program that provides health coverage if you're 65 or older. Medicaid is the state and federal program that provides health coverage if you have a low income. Because more and more people are outliving their assets, either because of the length of time that they've been on Earth or because of extraordinary health care costs, they end up having to engage in a spend down, which means that they can only have $2,000, other than their home, they can only have $2,000 in assets. And by qualifying for Medicaid, you then qualify for continuing government care, whether you're in a nursing facility, a residential care facility, or at home. Well, when you apply for Medicaid, Medicaid, again, as a federal program, encourages families to go ahead and complete your cemetery and funeral arrangements. There is an exemption for funeral and burial expenses written into the law. Once more, so that it doesn't fall on your loved ones the very moment you have someone pass away. So for the cemetery, for example, once you are not only authorized to get the property for you, for your spouse, but there is a traditional, historical, social interest in having family members buried together. So you can actually get burial property for your brothers and sisters, your children and your grandchildren, and it's all covered. For funeral, you are able to make arrangements just for you and your spouse, not other generations. But those are all qualified Medicaid expenses so that you can, even if you have not previously made arrangements, that Medicaid and the government qualifying program encourages families to make the appropriate arrangements. There are other issues that come up. There are people that are interested in donating an organ. And I know I've said this here before, but if you have not considered donating your organ, please do so. They are always in need of skin. There are children who are recovering from surgery and burn victims throughout our country that would benefit by the use of skin, even if you don't want any invasion into any of the other organs of your body. In Indiana, the program is, you have to qualify and go online. It's www.donatelifeindiana.org. And I say this as an example. How many people have a heart on their driver's license because they've to be an organ donor? Okay, that's more than half the room. How many of you have filled out the 3-page application online to be an organ donor? Okay, 1. So what the heart on your license plate means is simply for the medical professional, the healthcare provider, the nurse, the emergency room physician to look farther. It doesn't qualify you as an organ donor in and of itself. It's simply a way, because you'll usually have your driver's license on you, or if you're in a hospital room or residential care facility in your room. It's a way for them to identify it. So if you are interested in donating, then you would want to go to donatelifeindiana.org. There's also people that want to donate their body to science, and you can do that. You have to call the phone numbers at the bottom, or I can provide it to you afterwards. Because this has to be done ahead of time, because there can be disputes or tension in families if this isn't prearranged. How am I doing on time?
You're about out.
Okay. I'm going to move ahead then. What I want to say, 2 more things. It is starting in 2009, the state of Indiana allowed families to make a funeral planning declaration so that you can make your specific preferences known. And the reasons to do that is that there are times that a family member may say, I want a casket burial. And then later on, once that